All right. Welcome back to the Outlap Podcast, Season 2, covering the 2025 Formula One season. Going to be running this with Travis and Mike per usual, but with some scheduling conflicts, we wanted to get a preseason episode out, so recording it solo. Welcome back, our valued listeners. In terms of, what we're talking about today, going to go a little bit over last season, what my outlook on this season is, and some interesting changes on the rule front. And then finally, one bold prediction, and then finishing off with what I'm excited for this season. So should be a pretty short one because it's just kind of a monologue talking head video, but we'll get right into it. So going back to last season, I think it was one of the most tightly contested seasons of Formula One we've seen really since 2021 and Lewis and Max. Saw Lando, my guy Lando, saw him, finally win a race, and McLaren kind of moved into being what looks like the strongest car on the grid. They were able to prove that out, and they won the constructors last year. But with Max's hot start to the 2024 season, he got enough of a lead in the Drivers' Championship that he was able to come home with that still. But Red Bull was finally dethroned as the Constructors' Champion, dating all the way back to 2021, I believe. They won it that year against Lewis. But thought it was a really, really good season last year. Saw Oscar get his first win. A lot of driver changes. Danny Rick leaving, as well as Logan Sargent. Some new blood getting into F1. And then, leading into this season, obviously an absolutely insane driver market, what we call silly season. It was really interesting to see after Lewis was kind of the first domino that fell, making the move from Mercedes to Ferrari. Obviously very exciting seeing him in Ferrari red this year. But once that happened, it kind of kicked off silly season of last year. The next domino to fall was really Carlos Sainz, because Carlos Sainz was the one losing his seat from Ferrari, and proved himself to be a top-tier driver. Watching Drive to Survive right now, and they kind of went through the time that he was able to win the race coming back off of appendicitis 16 days later, and probably one of the best drives of his career. Ended up signing at Williams, sadly enough. Red Bull didn't come calling. I think there's some background there between Max Verstappen and Carlos Sainz and their fathers, funny enough, which is kind of probably why the root of why they didn't want to bring then any additional friction that Max might already be feeling in Red Bull. And then Mercedes just never gave him the call, apparently. So he ends up at Williams. Valtteri Bottas ends up losing his seat. We've got a couple brand new drivers in Sauber, which is going to be Audi in 2026. But we've got Nico Hülkenberg joining the stake team for this year and going to be Audi, as well as Gabriel Bortoleto, which is an exciting rookie. We've got Liam Lawson taking Checo's seat. I'm a big Liam Lawson guy. I think that he's going to do really well this year. I followed him for a good period of time. Ever since Alex Albon lost his seat, he was actually Alex Albon's teammate in DTM, and he wrecked him. So really impressed me then, and I've been following him ever since through the junior formulas. So excited for him to get a first full season, but obviously it's going to be pretty tough to go up against Max Verstappen as a rookie. So that's going to be interesting to see. Leading to the Mercedes, we've obviously got Kimi Antonelli coming in. Kimi is really exciting. I think he proved his quickness in the preseason test in Bahrain. So really excited to see how he challenges George Russell. And I think that's going to be a really interesting driver lineup. As we keep going down the list, we've obviously got Haas with a brand new driver lineup. So you've got Esteban Ocon in there, as well as Ollie Behrman. So Ollie proved himself a little bit last year. I think it'll be interesting to see how Esteban Ocon really is as a team leader. Has had a history of having some friction with teammates, so I think that's going to be interesting to play out. And obviously Haas started having a pretty strong car last year, so it'll be interesting to see if that kind of pace continues. But I know that they've kind of stopped developing that this year's car and putting majority of their eggs in that 2026 basket. But they do have Toyota on their side now, so that's kind of going to be an interesting thing to watch. Let's see who else. We went over Williams. I guess we talked about Sainz at Williams. All right, back to our regular scheduled programming. Wanted to make sure I had everything in front of me to not make any mistakes. So Alex Albon staying in Williams and Carlos Sainz joining, I think, is going to be an interesting dynamic. In my opinion, Alex has had one very strong teammate in Max Verstappen, but then pretty weak teammates ever since. So I think it'll be interesting to see how he stacks up against Carlos Sainz, who we know is a proper, quick race car driver. Next is, Racing Bulls, V-Carb. I like them as Racing Bulls much more than Visa Cash App Red Bull, but a lot of people are still calling him V-Carb. Yuki Tsunoda not getting the chance to move up into the senior team, I think because of his connections with Honda, who ultimately now have connections with Aston Martin long-term. I think that's his long-term home, and they'd rather give someone who's properly going to stay in their organization a chance before. Yeah, I also think they just don't think Yuki has the chops to be able to stack up against Max. Not a lot of people do, but I think they think that Liam has a better shot at doing so. And then Isaac Hadjar, who's another rookie joining the grid. I've seen him quite a bit. I didn't think he was on the radar actually for a Formula One seat, but his name kind of bubbled up late. He performed pretty well in the F2 championship last year, so it's going to be interesting to watch him, pan out his first year. I think that pretty much covers it. We've got Charles staying with Ferrari. That matchup versus Lewis is going to be really good. Fernando and Lance Stroll. That lineup staying the same. I think they're probably betting a little bit on Adrian Newey being able to design a good car for 26, and I don't know how much eggs they're going to have in this year's basket. Final rookie on the grid, though, got Pierre Gasly staying in Alpine, but Jack Doohan being the new rookie joining him. Going to be really interesting to see because there's already been some rumblings of, they signed the kid from last year that stepped in. I can see his face. Colapinto. They signed Colapinto to as a reserve driver. They already have a couple other reserve drivers, and Jack Doohan's kind of one getting the first shot is what that feels like right now. So seems like before he's even done a race in his rookie season, his only race he's done was the last race of last year. He's already a little bit on the hot seat. I like Jack Doohan. He's always really personal when he hops on the F1 TV broadcasts. So pulling for him. Pierre Gasly's a quick driver, so I think it's going to be a good measuring stick, and I hope he's able to just at least perform fairly well. So obviously, lots of moves in the driver's market. I think that's going to be one of the most interesting changes coming from last year, where we pretty much had no driver movement other than the couple in-season moves, to an absolutely insane, silly season with a number of rookies on the grid. So technically, we've got 6. So we've got Liam Lawson, we've got Isaac Hadjar, we've got Kimi Antonelli, we got Gabriel Bortoleto, we've got Ollie Behrman, and then we've got Jack Doohan, which makes 6. So a lot of new drivers. Saw a meme today that my wife sent me that was saying 6 rookies and Lance Stroll on the grid, and it was just a compilation of F1 wrecks. So that's going to be, I think, expected to the 6 rookies on the grid early in the season. There's probably going to be a higher number of safety cars than I was than you originally anticipate. If you're a betting person and you want to put a prop bet on a safety car, I think it's a pretty safe bet for this weekend. Outlook on this season. So we've kind of covered up to last season. Outlook on this season, I'm really excited just because of how close it was between the top 4 teams last year. It seems like McLaren is going to be coming out of the gates firing, but there is some changes to the regulations coming, I think, on race 9. There's a new directive in terms of the flexi wings. There's going to be a new test that's more stringent put in place, and it's kind of known that is one of the things that McLaren was really taking advantage of and making their downforce really efficient. So hopefully that doesn't screw the back half of the year, but looking like right now that McLaren is probably the favorite for the constructors again. But it was really tight between the top 4. You had the occasional race early in the year. Red Bull was dominant, but then it was kind of McLaren had the best car, wasn't able to execute, finally started executing at the end of the year. Too little too late on the driver's front, but was able to pull off the constructors. But between Mercedes, Ferrari, and Red Bull, it's really tight. The Ferrari's looking fairly good, and so I'm really excited for how tight the racing is going to be this year. Harking back to the 2021 year, which is the last end of regulation season that we've had, and it was an amazing championship battle that came down to the last race. And that's, I think, all we hope for as Formula One fans. We don't want any team to walk walk away with it. Obviously, I'm a McLaren fan, I'm a Lando fan, but nobody wants to see just pure dominance. I'd love to see, a proper battle, and we have a lot of those races like we did last year where we don't know what the podium's going to look like because it's just that tight. And that's up at the top, but then the midfield is even tighter. So I think there's going to be a lot of really, really good racing, a lot of on-track moves because of how close the cars are. So this should be one of the best seasons of Formula One that, we've had the privilege to watch. Definitely looking forward to watching the rookies and how they pan out as well. And those are kind of the things that I'm looking forward to this year. I really, really think the racing is going to be tight. Pulling for McLaren, this is probably one of the, hard to say that Lando's going to have a better chance in his career to win a driver's championship. So I hope he's able to capitalize on that. Interesting dynamic there. I think it's going to be tough for me to watch as a Lando fan. I don't dislike Piastri, but I want Lando to be able to kind of prove that he's the number one guy. And there was definitely quite a few races in Oscar's second season that he was able to get up on the podium, beat Lando, win races. So I hope that it doesn't come into any funny business like there was going on last year where should be prioritization, but there wasn't. It seems like overall McLaren is going to go on the route of, unless it's a very clear cut, one guy has the chance over the other, they're not going to really play any favorites, which means Lando, obviously has to prove himself to being able to fight Max and all that, and the storylines that they built, into Drive to Survive, but he's also got to prove that he's unequivocally faster than Oscar, and I think that's going to be a tough task. I mentioned the flexi wings change, but there's a couple other interesting changes coming into the rule set this year. So, the regulations overall are staying the same, but the weight limit for the cars has gone a couple kilos up. So they've actually, what that comes from is the minimum car weight is driver and car. So they upped the minimum driver weight to 82 kilos, which means that the car is going to be 2 kilos heavier. But it should make it a little bit better, and those guys aren't having to cut so much weight and stay so slim for some of the larger frame drivers, which I think is a good move. The other piece that I think is a very, very good move is they have now implemented a heat warning system to where if it's going to be, I think, above 30.5, they implement a heat warning, which then every driver and every team is going to be wearing a cooling vest in the car. So you've seen people wear cooling vests outside of the car. They're going to be wearing cooling vests in the car with a little AC pump that's battery operated, but every team is mandated to use it. So it's no penalty to anybody, because that's kind of the way it is now. If a team wanted to do that, they absolutely could, but that's extra weight, which means lap time. And the driver's like, nah, I'm going to suffer and I'm going to get the best lap time I can. Whereas now you're going to actually have those safety measures in place for the drivers. I don't think it was, that bad, but like there was drivers talking about passing out behind the wheel. Lance Stroll, he's a little soft, but every single driver in like the Qatar Grand Prix a couple years ago got out of the car and looked like they just ran a marathon. And it was at the point where there was some danger. Some folks couldn't get out of the car following the race, and I think that's a good move. The other change that's coming is no more fastest lap point. We can kind of thank Danny Rick and Red Bull and V-Carb for that, because of he was able to snake the fastest lap point away from Lando Norris at Singapore last year on his send-off. But because of the nature of what, it doesn't actually end up being the fastest lap while racing. It ends up being whatever top team gets a gap behind them that's a pit stop gap. They pit late in the race and get the fastest lap point, and that's not the reason why it was there. So they're getting rid of it this year. I'm in support of that, because I think that it's just kind of that extra little layer of something, but it doesn't really mean anything at the end of the day. And you always kind of 75% of the way through the race, you can take a pretty good guess of who's going to get the fastest lap based on what the gaps look like, and I don't think that's what it's there for. So a couple interesting changes. No more fastest lap single point, so you won't, you'll still get the purple pop up on the broadcast, but it's not going to be the same worthiness in terms of points. So a couple interesting changes. As I mentioned with the flexi wings thing, I think it's going to be interesting. I think a lot of teams have started to exploit the flexibility of wings, McLaren definitely being one of them. So that's going to be probably the biggest shakeup in terms of the pecking order. I think it's going to be stay pretty as it is. We'll really get the full picture in Australia, but I think it's going to stay pretty much as it is. And most of the teams are developing the wings for beyond that regulation change. So if anybody's still developing this year's car, they're going to be developing it for the back half, knowing that reg change is coming. So lot of stuff to look forward to. Some interesting changes in terms of bold predictions. I'm going to go a little bit out of left field. I don't think it would be that bold of a prediction to say Lando's going to win the drivers. That's more of a hope. But my bold prediction is that Liam Lawson is going to win a race this year. And I don't think anybody necessarily has those expectations of him. So I'm gonna bet on my guy Liam. I think he's gonna be able to beat Max, and be close enough to be able to compete and capitalize on those few times that it doesn't go perfect for Max, or maybe he doesn't have the pace for whatever reason. So that's my bold prediction going into this year. And then I'll throw a prediction out in terms of drivers and constructors. We'll check in with Mike and Trav next episode. But in terms of drivers, I am gonna bet on my guy Lando. And then in terms of constructors, it's hard to not bet on McLaren. If any team were to do it, I think it's gonna be Ferrari, because Mercedes has a rookie, Red Bull has a rookie. Red Bull doesn't look like they have as strong of a car, nor does Mercedes. So I think it's gonna have to be Ferrari if anybody is gonna take the constructors from McLaren. So I'll say McLaren with the caveat that I think it'll be a 1-2 McLaren Ferrari, and Ferrari probably being the only ones that have a chance to really challenge them for the constructors. I don't think Red Bull's going to have it quite like they did this year or last year. So pretty quick pod, a little bit shorter than 20 minutes, but appreciate you guys tuning in. I know this was a little bit of a monologue talking head video, but I'm a big Formula One fan, watch a lot of stuff on it, and like to be as knowledgeable as I can. So hope you learned something new today, and got just that little bit more excited for this season of F1 kicking off, this weekend down in Australia. So thanks for joining. That's another episode of the Outlap Podcast.